A wild cry in the darkness. She was just a baby, tiny, trembling, and alone, trapped in a rusted snare at the edge of a remote forest near Asheville, North Carolina. Her cry echoed through the trees like a whisper of desperation. But what happened after this bobcat was rescued stunned everyone, because instead of running from humans, she did something no wild animal had ever done before. What could make a creature of the wild choose to stay? What secret was buried in those golden eyes? Keep watching, because this is not just a story of survival, but of something deeper, something wild and miraculous. The cry in the Carolina pines. Sometimes, the wild doesn't cry for help with a roar, but with a whisper you can only hear if your heart's still open. The wind moved slowly through the ancient pine trees of Pisgah National Forest, whispering across the fallen leaves and damp moss, like it was carrying a secret. Early morning frost clung to the forest floor, crunching beneath the worn boots of a young woman making her way through the brush. The sun hadn't yet broken the horizon, and everything still wore the soft, silver hush of dawn. It was the kind of stillness that demanded reverence, and that was exactly how Hannah Cooper moved through it. At 27, Hannah had the kind of quiet strength that people rarely noticed until it was the only thing left holding a situation together. Her deep, green eyes scanned the landscape like she was reading it, seeing patterns in the chaos that others couldn't. Auburn hair pulled back in a single braid, flannel shirt rolled up to the elbows, notebook half tucked into the side of her backpack. She looked like she belonged to this forest just as much as the trees did. She had been out since before first light, tracking a herd of deer for a behavioral study, her GPS unit blinking steadily in her pocket. As a wildlife biologist for the state, fieldwork was both her job and her therapy. Every twig crack, every shift of the wind told her a story, and over time, she'd learned to listen better than most. But today, the forest had something else to say. She stopped. There it was again, a sound not native to the trees or birds or wind. Faint, almost like a whimper. A cry, not human, not quite cat-like either. Her hand instinctively went to the strap of her pack where a small tranquilizer kit and emergency med supplies were always clipped. She crouched low, pressing her ear to the air. It came again. This wasn't part of any pattern she knew. This was out of place, wild, desperate. And it was close. Without hesitation, she changed course and pushed deeper into the underbrush, heart starting to beat faster. Whatever it was, it needed her. And for reasons she couldn't explain yet, she needed it too. Discovery of the bobcat kitten. You never forget the moment two frightened souls recognize each other in silence. The underbrush thickened with every step, but Hannah moved like she belonged there. Low, deliberate, careful not to spook whatever creature was crying out for help. Brambles tugged at her sleeves as she eased her way through a wall of mountain laurel, then froze. There, barely 10 feet ahead, was a flicker of movement. A small, golden tawny shape trembled beside a fallen log, its body coiled in tension, but too weak to flee. At first, it looked like a wild kitten. Then Hannah saw the black-tipped ears, tufted and alert despite the exhaustion. A short, bobbed tail twitched once, then stilled. A baby bobcat. She couldn't have been more than 8 weeks old, barely the size of a house cat. Her fur was matted with mud and pine needles, and one front paw, bloodied and swollen, was caught in the cruel clamp of an old steel snare. "Damn," Hannah whispered, heart breaking. The snare was illegal in this region, likely left behind by a careless trapper months ago. She'd seen injuries like this before, brutal, merciless, but rarely on something so young. The bobcat hissed weakly, a sound more fear than threat. Her amber eyes met Hannah's with a flicker of fire that hadn't yet died. That stare, piercing and wild, froze Hannah in place for a heartbeat. There was pain in those eyes, yes, but also something else. Something like hope? "Hey, baby," Hannah murmured, her voice dropping into the kind of softness only animals and children understood. "I see you. I got you." She eased closer, slow enough that even the wind seemed to hold its breath. 1 inch at a time, she reached into her side pack, pulling out thick leather gloves and bolt cutters. The kitten bared tiny teeth, but didn't lunge. Instead, she flinched, like she'd expected pain. "I won't hurt you." In a swift motion, Hannah clamped the cutters onto the rusted trap and pressed. With a metallic snap, the jaws sprang open. The kitten yelped and scrambled backward, dragging her injured leg before collapsing in a heap. But she didn't run. She just lay there, watching. And as Hannah gently wrapped her coat around the fragile, shaking body, she knew this wasn't going to be just another rescue. This was something different. A wild soul in a warm place. You don't choose the moment that changes everything. It chooses you. The drive back to the cabin was slow, winding, and silent except for the occasional whimper from the passenger seat. Hannah had bundled the little bobcat into a nest of fleece blankets inside a plastic crate she'd repurposed for wildlife transport. She glanced at the small body curled up inside, shivering, bleeding but alert. "You're gonna be okay," she whispered, as if saying it aloud might make it true. Her cabin stood on the edge of Brevard, tucked into a clearing about 5 miles from the park boundary. It was a modest, timber-framed home built by her father years ago. One big open room with exposed beams, a wood-burning stove in the corner, and glass windows that looked out into the pines. A life of solitude and observation suited her. The forest was her comfort, her rhythm. As she pulled into the gravel drive, her aging truck crunched to a stop beside a stack of firewood. The screen door creaked open, and a single thump came from inside. Rook, her retired police dog, appeared with a low bark and sleepy eyes. He was a 12-year-old Belgian Malinois, one ear permanently cocked, and one hind leg stiff from old injuries. His bark faded as he sniffed the air, curious but calm. Hannah opened the crate slowly. The bobcat hissed, but it lacked the strength to back away. Her injured paw was swollen to nearly twice its normal size. "I'm going to help you. Just hang in." She cleared the kitchen counter, spread a towel, and laid the kitten down gently. The baby tensed, eyes wide, but didn't fight. Rook stood at a respectful distance, sensing something fragile, something sacred. Hannah cleaned the wound with warm saline, whispering gentle words like spells. The gash was deep, but not beyond saving. She applied antibiotic cream and wrapped the paw in gauze and vet tape. The kitten whimpered once, then, shockingly, stilled. "She's tougher than she looks," Hannah murmured. Later that night, after a small feeding of diluted goat's milk and mashed soft meat, the kitten fell into a restless sleep on a folded flannel shirt by the fireplace. Hannah sat nearby on the floor, her back to the couch, staring into the flames. She didn't name her rescues, not at first. Naming something meant letting it into your world, into your story. It made the letting go harder when the time came. But this one, she already knew it was going to be different. There was something about those eyes. How they didn't just look at you but into you. The next morning, the kitten woke with a quiet yawn, blinking slowly at the soft orange light spilling through the cabin windows. Hannah approached with fresh water and a syringe of formula. This time, there was no hiss, only wary curiosity. "I guess we need to call you something," she said softly. "Something wild but soft." She paused, then smiled. "Juniper." The name slipped out like it had always belonged to her. Fierce, small, and unexpected, like the resilient shrubs that grow from the cracks in mountain cliffs, defying logic, clinging to life. Juniper. As Hannah watched her settle into the worn fabric by the hearth, tiny paws tucked under her chest, her breathing even. The word echoed in her mind again. This wasn't a guest. This wasn't temporary. Juniper had found something in Hannah. And maybe, just maybe, Hannah had found something in her. Eyes that speak. Sometimes it's not the loudest cry for help that moves you. It's the quiet gaze that asks nothing and means everything. The days that followed blurred into a gentle rhythm. Sunlight through tall windows, the crackle of the fire, the quiet shuffle of Hannah's boots across hardwood floors. And always, at the center of it all, Juniper. The little bobcat didn't warm up overnight. Wild animals never do. Trust, for them, isn't given. It's earned in breaths, in silence, in stillness. The first few days were full of uncertainty. Juniper would growl low when Hannah approached, flattening her ears, sometimes baring her teeth with the last bits of defiance she had left. But she didn't try to escape. That mattered. Each morning, Hannah prepared food, softened meat, bone broth, water laced with electrolytes, and placed it a few feet from Juniper's bed near the fireplace. She would then back away, giving her space, letting her choose. And every time, the young bobcat would wait until Hannah had turned her back before creeping forward to eat.
But something changed on the fourth day. Juniper didn't wait. She stood up on shaky legs and limped toward Hannah as she crouched to clean the bedding. The bobcat didn't growl. She didn't hiss. She just looked at her. Those golden eyes, ringed in darkness, locked with Hannah's for the first time without fear. Just recognition. Hannah stayed still, barely breathing. Then, unbelievably, Juniper nudged her head forward and pressed her tiny nose to the back of Hannah's hand. It was no more than a second, but in that second, the entire forest could have fallen silent, and the world would have missed it. Hannah's throat tightened. She didn't speak, didn't cry. She just let her hand stay there, letting Juniper decide. And Juniper, trembling but brave, let her. That night, Juniper didn't sleep on the floor. She curled on Hannah's old flannel jacket, just beside the couch where Hannah dozed off reading field notes. And for the first time in weeks, Hannah didn't dream of the things that used to haunt her. There was something unspoken about the bond forming between them, an invisible thread tying two broken parts together. Hannah had never talked much about her brother. He died when they were kids, a car crash on a rainy road when he was only 10. She'd been 11, old enough to understand loss, too young to carry it. Her parents divorced 2 years later. Hannah had never really found her way back from that fracture. The woods had become her only place of peace, her escape from a world too loud with sorrow. Until now, until this creature, with her bruised paw and cautious eyes, had walked into her life and mirrored that same quiet ache. They weren't healer and patient anymore. They were survivors, of traps and loss, of wounds both seen and hidden. And in their quiet rituals, feeding, cleaning, long silent moments by the fire, something deeper grew. A kind of trust, not the kind you speak of, but the kind that exists between hearts that recognize each other's scars. Rook, wise and slow with age, seemed to understand. He never approached too quickly. Sometimes he would lie just a few feet from Juniper, eyes closed, tail thumping once in acknowledgement. A silent kind of approval. Hannah kept a journal through it all, jotting down Juniper's weight, feeding schedule, movement, paw swelling. But as the days went on, the entries turned less clinical, more personal. Day 6. She followed me around the cabin today. Not close, just a few feet behind, like she wasn't ready to admit she cared. I get that. Day 9, she purred. It was quiet, broken almost, but it was there. I hadn't realized how much I missed that sound. Juniper's paw began to heal faster than Hannah expected. The swelling reduced, and she could now walk without limping. By day 10, she was play-pouncing on a bundle of knotted rope, and by day 12, she had jumped onto the windowsill, sunning herself with regal pride. But with each sign of improvement, Hannah felt something unexpected creeping in. Dread, because soon someone would come asking questions. And the moment she feared was no longer if, but when. Should she be free? Some rules are meant to protect the wild, but what if they forget to protect what's already been saved? Some rules are meant to protect the wild, but what if they forget to protect what's already been saved? It started with a phone call, the kind Hannah had been dreading since the day she wrapped Juniper in her coat and whispered, "You're safe now." The voice on the other end was clipped, professional, and too polite to feel casual. It was a regional officer from the state wildlife department. Someone had reported a bobcat being treated in a private residence near Pisgah, probably a hiker who spotted Juniper through the cabin window. Or maybe it was just routine enforcement. Either way, they were coming. By law, wild animals, especially predators like bobcats, could not be kept in private care beyond a short-term emergency. Even licensed wildlife rehabbers had to follow strict procedures. Hannah knew this. She had worked alongside the department before, but Juniper was different. Juniper wasn't just a bobcat. She was someone now. The next morning, a black SUV rolled up the gravel drive, dust rising behind it like a warning. Hannah stood on the porch, arms crossed over her chest, heart pounding behind her ribs. Out stepped Dr. Malcolm Reed, District Wildlife Supervisor. Late 50s, gray hair buzzed short, every inch of him reading by the book. He carried a clipboard like it was a badge. "Miss Cooper," he said with a nod, "we received a report. You're housing an injured juvenile bobcat."
She was caught in a snare. Her paw was nearly gone, Hannah replied calmly. There was no time to file forms, she would have died. Reed scanned the property. I understand the instinct to help, but the law is clear. Rehabilitation requires departmental authorization, which you don't currently have. We'll need to transfer the animal to a certified facility in Asheville by the end of the week. No. The word was out before Hannah could soften it. She's not ready. She's barely started eating solid food. You move her now, she won't survive the stress. Reed met her eyes, unflinching. The risk isn't just to the animal. A habituated bobcat, if reintroduced improperly, could become a danger to people. Or herself. Emotional attachment clouds judgment. Hannah's fists clenched at her sides. She's not a pet, she said, her voice shaking now. But she's not just a data point either. She's intelligent. She's bonded. Not like a house cat, but like something that remembers who hurt her and who didn't. And that matters. Reed paused, unreadable, then flipped a page on his clipboard. You have 7 days, he said. Then we reassess. But the current recommendation is full release or transfer. 7 days. After he left, Hannah sat on the steps, staring into the trees. Juniper was perched in the open window, her golden eyes fixed on the SUV disappearing down the road. She didn't move, just watched, like she understood. That night, Hannah couldn't sleep. Her mind raced with fears. Images of Juniper in a metal cage, surrounded by strangers in lab coats, terrified, and alone again. She didn't want to disobey the system. She respected conservation laws. But laws were supposed to protect, not punish. And if following the rules meant undoing everything Juniper had fought through to trust her, was it really the right thing? She glanced toward the fireplace. Juniper was curled in her usual spot, one paw twitching in sleep. 7 days. That's all they had left. Unless something changed. Unless Juniper proved to everyone else what Hannah already knew. She didn't need to be released to be wild. She already was. The night the storm came. Nature doesn't ask permission to change everything, it just does. On the 6th night, the wind came howling through the trees like a warning. A storm front had rolled down from the mountains, fast and violent. The kind of southern Appalachian thunderstorm that made even the oldest trees groan. Rain slammed against the roof in waves, rattling the windows like fists desperate to be let in. The forest beyond Hannah's cabin vanished in sheets of water and lightning flashes. Juniper had been pacing since sundown. She didn't like thunder. Even in her recovery, The deep, rolling sound made her body tense. Her tail twitched erratically, and her golden eyes darted toward every gust of wind. "She's gonna tear the screen door if this keeps up," Hannah muttered to herself, watching her from the kitchen. But Juniper wasn't just scared. She was agitated. The little bobcat stalked the living room like something was calling to her, something Hannah couldn't see. Then came the loud crack of a branch falling just outside, followed by a deep rumble of thunder that shook the walls. And then the silence, the kind that settles just before something breaks. That's when Hannah heard it, the crash. She ran outside, shielding her face from the rain, and her heart dropped. One of the larger pines behind the house had come down, crushing part of the fence line that bordered her property and the national forest. The enclosure gate, meant to keep rescued wildlife from wandering off, hung crookedly, swinging in the wind. Her eyes darted around, chest heaving. "Juniper!" she called once. No answer. She ran back inside, empty. The window was wide open, screen torn loose. Juniper was gone. The next few minutes passed in a blur. Hannah grabbed her coat, flashlight, rain boots. Rook barked anxiously, pacing at the doorway, sensing her panic. She plunged into the storm without a second thought. The forest trail was slick, mud sucking at her boots with every step. The beam of her flashlight cut through the trees, but the rain distorted everything. Branches looked like shadows. Thunder sounded like footsteps. Her voice disappeared into the night. "Juniper!" she yelled again. Nothing. She kept running, slipping, calling, searching. A dozen terrifying thoughts raced through her mind. Juniper injured, lost, hunted. She was still too small to fend for herself, too trusting to avoid real danger. The storm made the woods a death trap for anything her size. Hannah stumbled, hands hitting wet soil. She didn't get up right away. She just knelt there, rain washing down her face, not knowing if it was water or tears. She had 7 days, and she was losing her on the 6th. But somewhere, out in the dark, a young bobcat was still moving, faster, farther, not away, but towards something. Something no one had expected. Return, with a purpose. Some animals run from danger, others run to bring back help. The storm had passed by morning, but its mark was everywhere. Branches littered the ground. The air was thick with damp pine and churned mud. Hannah stood at the edge of the woods, her eyes heavy, her limbs sore. She had been out for hours, searching through the downpour, through brambles and gullies, calling Juniper's name until her voice cracked. And now, as the first pale light of dawn filtered through the clouds, there was nothing left to do but wait. She stepped back onto the porch, soaked and hollow, when a movement at the tree line caught her eye. Her breath stopped. There, just beyond the fallen fence, stood Juniper. Wet, filthy, panting, but upright. Alive. "Juniper!" Hannah whispered, hope leaping to her throat. But the bobcat didn't move toward her. She turned and walked away, then paused, turned back, looked at Hannah, and gave a short, sharp cry, almost like a command. "What?" Hannah blinked. "You want me to follow you?" She hesitated only a second before throwing on her coat and racing after her. Juniper moved with urgency, limping slightly, but determined. She led Hannah through the wreckage of the forest, across wet leaves and broken branches, deeper than they had ever gone together. Hannah's boots slipped in the soft ground as she kept up. Finally, Juniper stopped beside a thicket of thorn bushes near a dry creek bed. Hannah pushed through and gasped. There, caught in a rusted snare trap, was a larger bobcat, an adult. Its flank was streaked with blood, one eye swollen shut, breathing shallow, ragged. "Oh my God!" Hannah dropped to her knees beside it. Juniper circled once, then sat down just out of reach, watching. It wasn't random. This was who she had gone to find. Her mother? A sister? There was no way to be sure, but what was certain was this. Juniper hadn't escaped the storm. She hadn't run away. She had run for help. "I'll get her out," Hannah murmured, voice thick with awe. "I promise." She pulled out the wire cutters from her coat pocket. She never hiked without them anymore, and went to work. The trap was old, rusted, but strong. She braced her foot, squeezed hard, and with a sharp metallic snap, the jaws released. The adult bobcat let out a low moan, but didn't lash out. Her eyes flicked to Juniper, then to Hannah. Then she collapsed into the grass. Hannah stared at Juniper, so small beside the full-grown wildcat, and felt something break open inside her. This wasn't instinct. This was loyalty. This was love. And it changed everything. Not just wild. Sometimes it takes a wild heart to teach us what compassion truly means. By the time Hannah returned to the cabin, she was no longer alone. Wrapped in a blanket she kept in her emergency field kit, the injured adult bobcat lay limp in her arms. Juniper padded beside her, silent, watchful. Every step as steady as if she were leading the way back home. Hannah worked quickly, cleaning the new cat's wounds, wrapping gauze where the trap had torn through muscle, and administering antibiotics from her field stash. She knew it was risky, treating a second wild predator without a permit. But at that moment, rules felt like distant echoes in the face of what she had witnessed. A juvenile bobcat had disappeared in a storm, not to flee, but to bring help for another. That wasn't behavior born from survival instinct. That was devotion. It was 9 a.m. when a dark gray truck pulled into the drive. Dr. Malcolm Reed, right on schedule. Hannah stepped onto the porch before he could knock. Mud still streaked her jeans. A deep scratch ran along her left arm. And behind her, through the window, two bobcats lay in the warmth, one sleeping, the other sitting upright, eyes alert but calm. Reed removed his sunglasses. He didn't speak. "You're going to want to hear what happened last night," Hannah said, voice steady despite the exhaustion behind her eyes. And she told him everything. About the storm, about the escape, about Juniper returning not just unharmed but with purpose, leading her to the second bobcat, injured and dying in a trap. She didn't dramatize it. She didn't beg. She simply stated the facts and let the truth speak louder than any plea ever could. Reed listened in silence, arms crossed. When she was finished, he stepped up to the window and looked in. Juniper was staring at him, unmoving, unafraid. "She went back for her own," he said quietly. "That's not something I've ever seen in the field, especially not from a juvenile." "No," Hannah agreed, "but she did it, and that matters." Reed turned back to her. "I'll need to file a formal incident report. But," he paused, then almost smiled, "there's a clause. Rare cases where animals demonstrate exceptional behavior and value as educational ambassadors. It's rarely used, but I think we just found the exception." Hannah blinked. "You're serious?" "She's not just a wild bobcat anymore," Reed said. "She's proof that compassion, even in the wild, exists. And people need to see that." Within the week, the paperwork was processed. Juniper would remain under Hannah's care, not as a pet, not as a patient, but as a protected wildlife ambassador, part of a state-funded education program on human-wildlife coexistence. She would live with space, safety, and structure. Semi-wild, never caged, never tamed, and never alone. As for the adult bobcat, she recovered slowly, then was transferred to a certified sanctuary nearby, far from traps and roads and the cruelty of snares. Every so often, Hannah swore Juniper would sit by the window and stare off toward the pines, as if remembering. But she never tried to leave. She had chosen her place, and the world was finally ready to see her, not just as something wild, but something wondrous, saving each other. Sometimes we think we're rescuing them, but they're the ones pulling us back to life. The cabin felt different now. It wasn't just the extra warmth from the added insulation, or the new corner Hannah had cleared for Juniper's custom perch, or even the neatly posted educational materials about wildlife rescue hanging near the door. It was something quieter, something in the way the light came through the windows and landed on the floor where Juniper often rested, head lifted, eyes half closed, listening to a world most people never heard. Juniper had changed Hannah in ways she hadn't fully understood until weeks later. The anxiety that once crept up her spine in the silence of the woods. Gone? The guilt that clung to her over the brother she couldn't save. Softened. In Juniper, she had found not just a story to tell, not just a rescue to log, but a living, breathing reminder that healing never looks the same for any two beings. Sometimes, it looks like a girl on her knees in the woods. Sometimes, it looks like a broken paw nudging a hand for comfort.
People began to call. Local schools, state park rangers, even conservation podcasts. They wanted to hear the story. They wanted to meet the bobcat who ran into a storm not for herself, but for someone else. And Hannah, she told them everything. She didn't embellish it, didn't frame herself as a hero. She just said the truth. I found her in a trap, but the truth is, I think she found me too. And every time she looked at Juniper after that, she smiled. Because there in those amber eyes was no longer fear, only fire and peace, a mark left in fur and memory. Not all legends are loud. Some walk on soft paws and leave prints on hearts instead of dirt. It was a warm spring afternoon when the school bus rolled up the gravel road to Hannah's cabin. The children came in clusters, some excited, some nervous, their wide eyes drinking in the towering trees and quiet wilderness that felt like another world. They walked in single file toward the makeshift education shelter Hannah had built beside the cabin, a small open-air space with logs for benches and a hand-painted sign that read, "The wild still lives." At the center of it all, as always, was Juniper. She sat on her perch beneath a canopy of pine branches, calm and regal, her golden eyes tracking the movement with curiosity, not fear. A little girl with dark braids broke away from the group and approached the low wooden rail. She stared at Juniper with awe and silence, her small hands gripping the edge like it was holy ground. "She's looking at me," the girl whispered. Hannah knelt beside her. "She sees everything," she said softly. "She remembers the people who are gentle." The girl didn't move. "She knows me," she whispered, almost too quiet to hear. Hannah smiled, heart tightening. "Yes," she said. "She always did." Later that night, after the last car pulled away and dusk settled across the treetops, Juniper curled into her usual spot by the fire. Her breathing was slow, steady. Hannah sat nearby, pen in hand, writing the final lines of a journal entry. "Some beings are too wild to be owned, too brave to be forgotten." She was never just a bobcat. She was a reminder that even in the most unexpected places, love can survive. And sometimes, it walks back to you on four quiet feet. In the quiet bond between Hannah and Juniper, we are reminded that healing doesn't always roar. It often arrives softly, through trust, through patience, through the courage to care when it's easier to walk away. This story wasn't just about a bobcat rescued from a trap. It was about choosing connection over fear, action over indifference. Juniper didn't just survive. She showed us what loyalty looks like in its purest, wildest form. And Hannah? She taught us that sometimes the rules we live by must bend when life asks us to do what's right, not just what's safe. In our own lives, how often do we pass by someone, human or animal, silently calling for help? How often do we stop, listen, and choose to care anyway? Maybe we all have a little Juniper in us, something scarred but not broken, waiting to be seen, waiting to return the favor when it matters most. If stories like this move you, then Paw Prints and Stories is where you belong. Subscribe and join a community that believes in kindness, courage, and the unexpected ways animals remind us who we really are.